You ever meet someone who acts like they're the law of the land, right up until the moment they run into the actual law? Yeah, that's exactly the kind of person my neighbor Karen was. And trust me, the day she tried to tow a sheriff's car, thinking it was mine, was the day her whole self-appointed authority came crashing down. But before I dive into how Karen managed to embarrass herself on a federal level, I need you to understand where all of this started. Because drama doesn't grow out of nowhere. It thrives in places where everything looks perfect, but underneath, it's one big pressure cooker. I live in one of those perfect suburban neighborhoods, the kind real estate agents practically drool over. Smooth sidewalks, manicured lawns trimmed with military precision, white picket fences that match so well you'd think they were printed out of the same catalog. Even the mailboxes looked like clones. At a glance, everything was peaceful, quiet, and safe. But like any perfect place, the harmony was only surface level. Beneath that polished picture postcard exterior lived egos, power trips, and the kind of drama you only see when people have way too much free time. And at the center of that drama, one woman, Karen. Our AA wasn't even bad before she moved in. Honestly, it was chill. Everyone minded their own business. We waved to each other from driveways, kept our lawns decent enough, and only complained if someone did something seriously out of line, like letting a tree fall into someone else's yard. Then Karen arrived. The moment she bought her house, she marched straight into the HOA meetings and volunteered herself onto the board. And somehow, God only knows how, within 2 months she ended up as the unofficial enforcer of everything she thought people were doing wrong. This was ironic, considering she couldn't even back out of her own driveway without taking 5 tries and a prayer. But hey, in her mind, she was the sheriff of the neighborhood. The self-appointed law, the queen of clipboards and complaints. At first it was small stuff. A note about my trash bins being left out longer than HOA guidelines allow. Then another one about my mailbox being faded, which was funny, because it looked exactly the same as everyone else's. But when someone like Karen gets a little taste of power, they start thinking everyone else is the problem. The real chaos began the day I parked an unfamiliar car in my driveway. See, my buddy, Deputy Mark, works for the county sheriff's department. He was heading out on vacation for 2 weeks, and his usual secured spot downtown was full. So he asked me, "Hey man, can I leave my car at your place for a bit? Safer here than the station lot." I didn't think twice. "No problem," I told him. "Keys or no keys, keep the keys. Just don't mess with anything." Fair enough. The car was a sleek, unmarked Dodge Charger. Not your typical black and white patrol cruiser with lights on top. This one looked like any other high-end car, except for a few subtle details. A tiny antenna in the back. A certain official stance, even while parked. The kind of vehicle that made people straighten up when they saw it in their rearview mirror. I parked it in my driveway, covered half the windshield with a sunshade, and went about my day without a second thought. That was my mistake. Because within 24 hours, Karen smelled an opportunity. When I came home from work the next day, she was standing in my driveway, circling the car like she was inspecting a crime scene. Her phone was out, camera pointed at the Charger, expression sharp and irritated, as if she discovered an alien spacecraft hidden under my sunshade. I stepped out of my car and asked, "Everything okay, Karen?" She didn't even look embarrassed. "Excuse me," she snapped, "is this yours?" "Technically no," I told her, "just holding it for a friend." Her eyes narrowed like she'd caught me in a lie. "This vehicle is not compliant with HOA standards," she declared. "Commercial vehicles, government vehicles, and non-resident vehicles cannot be stored overnight." I almost laughed. "Karen, it's not a commercial vehicle. It's just a car." She pointed at the small antenna. "Don't play dumb. That's a law enforcement car." I shrugged. "You could say that." "Well," she huffed dramatically, "it doesn't belong here. I'll be issuing a notice." A notice? For a sheriff's car? On private property? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But she was dead serious. That night, I got an official-looking email from the HOA stating, "Your vehicle violates community standards due to its government association. Remove it within 24 hours to avoid fines or towing." I burst out laughing. Karen really thought she could tow a sheriff's car, a literal government vehicle. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I called Mark. He laughed so hard I thought he was going to choke on his dinner. Then he said something that instantly told me things were about to get interesting. "Don't touch the car. Let's have a little fun." And that was the moment the entire situation leveled up from annoying to legendary. Because Karen wasn't done, not even close. She was about to take her HOA power to a level that would blow up in her face so spectacularly, people in the neighborhood would still be talking about it months later. When I woke up the next morning, I honestly didn't expect anything dramatic. Part of me hoped Karen would cool off overnight, realize how ridiculous she was being, and move on to nitpicking someone else's lawn height. But of course, this was Karen, the self-appointed guardian of HOA righteousness. She wasn't cooling off. She was escalating. I pulled open my curtains to let in some sunlight, and the sight that greeted me made me spit out the mouthful of coffee I had just taken. A tow truck, parked directly across the street. Engine rumbling. Driver sitting inside looking confused and unsure, and who was standing out front in her fuzzy morning robe like she was heading a military operation. Karen, clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other, pointing at my driveway as if she were leading an FBI raid. I just stared. Was this woman really doing it? Was she actually trying to have an unmarked sheriff's vehicle towed off my private property? I walked outside slowly, half curious, half entertained. The tow truck driver seemed uncomfortable, glancing at the Dodge Charger in my driveway like he knew something was off. As I stepped outside, I heard him ask Karen, "Mom, are you sure this is okay? It looks like a government vehicle." Karen rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might fall out of her head. "It's not," she snapped. "It's abandoned. It's been sitting here for days without moving. And she lifted the clipboard slightly, "am the HOA president. You have my authorization." Her voice had that tone people use when they're bluffing with absolute confidence. Unfortunately for her, the driver wasn't convinced. "Still," he said hesitantly, "government vehicles are complicated. If it belongs to law enforcement, tampering with it could." "It's not law enforcement," she barked, cutting him off. "It just looks like it is. Trust me, I know the rules here, trust me." From Karen, the same woman who couldn't park straight in her own driveway. Yeah, great source. I leaned against my porch railing, genuinely entertained at this point. I didn't even want to interfere. Why ruin the show when the main event hadn't even arrived yet? The tow truck began to back up toward my driveway, very slowly, as though the driver was hoping someone would stop him before he made a huge mistake. And right when it looked like Karen's delusion was about to literally hook onto a sheriff's vehicle, a familiar car turned the corner. A sheriff's cruiser. Not unmarked. Not subtle. Fully decked out with lights, markings, badge decals. The whole package. Karen froze mid-sip of her coffee. The cruiser pulled up smoothly, stopped behind the tow truck, and out stepped Deputy Mark, my friend, wearing his full uniform, sunglasses on, calm expression on his face like he was about to enjoy a Sunday stroll. He walked toward Karen and the tow truck driver, hands resting on his belt, his badge catching the morning light. "Morning," he said casually. "What's going on over here?" Instant tone shift. Instant. Karen transformed from drill sergeant to trembling citizen in under half a second. "Oh, officer! Thank goodness you're here," she said, voice suddenly soft and shaky. "We're just having this unauthorized car towed. It's been parked here illegally for days." Mark nodded, slow and deliberate. "Illegally," he repeated. "You sure about that?" "Les," Karen said confidently, trying to regain her composure. "I'm the HOA president, and this car is not registered to any resident. It doesn't belong here." Mark tilted his head slightly, as if debating whether she was serious or just unbelievably misinformed. "Well," he said after a moment, "you're right about one thing." Karen's shoulders lifted, pride swelling. "It's not registered to any resident." She smirked. "Exactly," Mark continued. "It's registered to the county sheriff's department." Her face didn't just drop, it collapsed. All color drained away. I almost felt bad, almost. Mark pulled out his badge and held it up near his chest. "Malam, this is an active duty law enforcement vehicle. You've just authorized a private contractor to tamper with government property. That's a federal issue." If the ground could have opened up and swallowed her right there, she would have jumped in head first. "I didn't know," she stammered. It just looks suspicious." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious? Parked in a private driveway, with permission from the homeowner." Karen didn't even breathe. The tow truck driver looked like he was trying to shrink into his seat to avoid being noticed. Mark continued calmly, but his words were sharp enough to cut through Karen like a razor. "You might want to be more careful next time you start authorizing things. A clipboard doesn't outrank the county sheriff's office." The tow truck driver was already unhooking the chains before Mark finished the sentence. He nodded at him respectfully, muttered a quick apology, and drove off faster than I'd ever seen a tow truck move. Karen stood there, robe tied unevenly, hair frizzing out from stress, gripping her clipboard like it was her last defense. Then, without another word, she scurried, back into her house, practically running. I swear she didn't make eye contact with me for an entire week after that. But the story spread like wildfire. By Thursday, almost every neighbor who walked past my driveway had something to say. "You really let her step in it this time. Man, she's not living this one down. She tried to tow the sheriff's car. Seriously." And just when Karen probably thought the embarrassment was the worst of it, it got worse, because Deputy Mark, he wasn't done. He filed a formal report for unauthorized interference with official property. and that report got sent straight to the HOA board. The next morning felt strangely calm, but underneath that calmness was a storm of decisions waiting to be made. I woke up early, almost before sunrise, because my mind wouldn't let me sleep. The events of last night kept replaying in my head. The HOA Karen standing at my door with her fake warning, the inspection that never actually happened, and of course, the accusation that my dog had attacked a neighbor, even though my cameras showed he hadn't even left the backyard. It all felt like a setup. The kind of thing that isn't random, isn't accidental, and definitely isn't normal OA behavior. But now I wasn't just suspicious, I was motivated. I grabbed my laptop, made some coffee, and opened all the documents related to my property. The land lease, the structural plans, old emails from the land developer, even the digital map coordinates. I wanted to check every inch, every detail. The more I dug, the more confident I became that Karen had absolutely no legal ground to stand on. The house I owned was built on leased land, not HOA land. That meant the HOA didn't have jurisdiction over certain things, especially structural inspections. And yet she kept insisting they did. I needed someone who could verify what I already suspected, so I made the call. The line rang twice before my friend, who happened to work in real estate legal compliance, picked up. He sounded half asleep. "Bro, do you know what time it is?" I know, I said. "But this is urgent." He sighed. "All right, what's going on?" I explained everything. Karen's unannounced visit, the fake inspection notice, the complaint about the dog, and most importantly, the way she threatened me with legal action if I didn't cooperate. I told him about my cameras, the timestamps, the fact that no one had come to check anything, even though she claimed there was a problem with my foundation. He listened quietly until I finished. Then he said, "Okay, first thing, none of that is standard. HOAs can't issue structural citations without a licensed inspector verifying it. Second thing, if your land is part of a private lease, the HOA might not even have authority. You could actually flip this on her." I leaned back in my chair, taking a long breath. Flip this on her. That idea stuck with me. "What do you mean flip?" I asked. "Simple," he said. "If your lease agreement proves the HOA has no jurisdiction, then every warning she issued is invalid. And if she harassed you or made false claims, you can respond with legal pressure of your own." This was huge, bigger than I even expected. My suspicion was now backed by an expert. "And the dog complaint?" I asked. "If you have proof she lied, that's even worse for her. HOAs aren't allowed to fabricate incidents just to fine a resident. That's harassment, retaliation, and power abuse." I thanked him and hung up. Suddenly, I felt like I had control again, not just emotionally, but legally. And that's when something surprising happened. When I checked my mailbox around noon, I found an envelope from the HOA. Another notice. This time, in bold letters, Finel Warning. I stood in my driveway reading it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even stressed. I was annoyed that they thought I was that unaware. Inside the envelope were two documents, a claim that a structural hazard had been documented and needed urgent reinforcement, a formal complaint that my dog had become a repeated threat. Both documents included Karen's signature, and that was the moment I knew she had gone too far. There was no turning back. I walked inside, grabbed the leash, and took my dog out to the backyard. I checked the cameras again, zooming into the timestamps from the day she made the accusation. My dog had been sleeping most of the afternoon. The so-called incident never happened, and that meant the HOA had just lied. Officially. Now this wasn't about fines or threats. It was about power. I sat down at my desk again and drafted a simple but strong email. It was addressed to the HOA board, not Karen directly. I included screenshots from my security cameras, copies of my lease agreement, timestamps proving no inspector ever showed up, and a clear statement that Karen's warnings were fraudulent. I worded everything carefully, respectfully, professionally, but the message was clear. Your representative has issued false notices, overstepped legal boundaries, and fabricated an incident involving my dog. I request a formal review of her actions before I pursue legal counsel. I hit send. For the first time in days, I felt relief, not because the problem was solved, but because I had finally taken the narrative back into my own hands. Hours passed with no response from the board. Not an email, not a call. But Karen, she showed up in person. Around 6 p.m., I heard sharp knocking on the door. Short, aggressive knocks that told me exactly who it was without even looking at the camera feed. I opened the door just enough to step outside, keeping the screen door between us. She was already talking before I even said hello. "You can't just email the board accusing me of misconduct," she snapped. "You're digging yourself even deeper." I kept my voice calm. "I sent them facts, evidence, nothing more." She crossed her arms, glaring at me like she was impenetrable. "You think a little email is going to save you when we take this to court? And you think the court will ignore camera footage?" I asked. She froze. Just for a second. just long enough for me to know I had hit the right nerve. Her expression hardened again, but her tone had changed, shaky, less confident. "You're making trouble for yourself," she said. "Or maybe," I replied, "you've finally been caught." She clenched her jaw, turned around without another word and walked off. Not confidently, but fast, like someone escaping instead of winning. And that's when I realized something: she wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of the evidence, but I had no idea how big this would actually become. Because the next morning, a letter arrived from the HOA board. A real one, official. And inside it was a statement that changed everything. A statement revealing a truth Karen never wanted me to discover. A truth that would lead directly into the final showdown. The next morning began with an unexpected stillness. No barking dogs, no lawnmowers, no neighborhood noise. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I walked outside to grab my mail, not expecting anything major. But then I saw it: a thick envelope, white, stamped with the official HOA seal. Not a generic warning. Not a Karen-written notice. This one was formal. For a moment I just held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it, literally and figuratively. The silence around me made the moment even heavier. I opened it carefully, sliding the documents out. Inside were 3 pages. The first line on the first page nearly made me laugh out loud. "We appreciate your recent email and the evidence you provided." Appreciate. After days of being threatened, harassed, and accused, I continued reading, and the tone of the letter quickly shifted. It stated that after reviewing my lease documentation, the board had confirmed something that completely exposed everything Karen had been doing. "Your property is not under the structural jurisdiction of the HOA. Any warnings issued regarding foundation, inspection, or structural hazards were issued in error by our representative." In error. They called it an error. Except it wasn't an error. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. Then came the second page, about the dog incident. "We have reviewed the timestamped video evidence you provided and found no proof of the reported animal attack. We will be withdrawing the complaint immediately." There it was. Proof, admission, confirmation that the entire accusation had been fabricated. But the third page, that was the one that changed everything. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an attempt to make peace. It was something far more shocking. Karen had filed an internal report claiming my house was partially on HOA-owned land. That was her entire motive. She genuinely believed that if she could push enough fines, violations, and pressure, she could scare me into selling, or at least force me into compliance so she could claim the HOA had control over my property. Except she was wrong. Dead wrong. The board's final statement made that clear. "Your house is entirely on leased land that is privately managed. The HOA does not own, control, or maintain the land under your property." And then, the last line: "We will be reviewing Ms. Karen's conduct in this matter." That told me everything I needed to know. She had acted alone. She had lied. She had abused her position. She had pushed too far. And now the board was ready to deal with her. I sat down on the porch, staring at the 3 pages, feeling a mix of vindication and exhaustion. But before I even had time to process it, I heard footsteps approaching, slow, hesitant. Karen. She wasn't storming over like before. She wasn't ready to threaten. She looked nervous. Even smaller somehow, like the weight of everything had finally collapsed onto her shoulders. She stopped several feet away from me and cleared her throat. "I assume you got the letter," she said quietly. I folded the papers and set them on my lap. "Yes, I did." She looked down at her hands, avoiding eye contact. "You weren't supposed to know about the land issue. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated. "You tried to find me, scare me, and accuse my dog based on a misunderstanding." She didn't answer, but her silence said enough. I continued. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a move. You thought you could push me into a corner." Her eyes lifted, and for the first time, she didn't look angry. She looked caught. "I was told the land boundaries were unclear," she insisted. "I was trying to protect the HOA." "No," I said calmly. "You were trying to control something that wasn't yours." That hit her harder than she expected. She looked away, blinking quickly like she was trying to hold herself together. After a long pause, she said the last thing I ever expected from her: "I'm stepping down from the board." I didn't speak. I didn't react. I didn't even nod. I just listened. "The board asked me to reconsider my role after reviewing your evidence," she continued. "I didn't want this to turn into something bigger, but it already had." Then she added, voice low, "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, not loud, not forced, just quietly real. For a second, even I didn't know what to say, because the truth was, I didn't want revenge. I didn't want a feud. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted fairness. So I replied, "Let's just move on. No more lies, no more games." She nodded slowly, almost gratefully, then turned and walked away. Not stiff and confident like before, but calm, humbled, human. And just like that, the storm was over. Over the next few days, The neighborhood atmosphere shifted. The HOA board sent out a new announcement. All future citations and complaints must be reviewed and verified before being issued. That told me they had learned from this. They were tightening their system. They weren't giving unchecked power to anyone again. As for me, life became peaceful again. No more surprise knocks, no more fake notices. No more stress every time my dog barked at a squirrel. The security cameras stayed on, not because I expected more trouble, but because they had become part of the story. A reminder that truth matters, evidence matters, boundaries matter. And land leases. Yeah, they matter more than Karen ever realized. In the end, I didn't have to fight her. I didn't have to sue. I didn't have to escalate. The truth did the work for me. All I did was refuse to be intimidated.